You are now entering the world of a movie review. A world full of drama, joy, ridicule, movie spoilers, unpopular opinions, and adult humor for as far as the eye can see. Welcome to An Evening at the Movies.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to your favorite movie-based podcast. This is An Evening at the Movies. As you all know, this is the podcast where we eat the stale popcorn, we drink the watered-down sodas, and we discuss all of our favorite movies and hopefully why we love them. But again, you guys have been here for the whole 3-year run of the show, and you know we don't always discuss favorite movies. Sometimes we discuss the bad movies too. But I have a feeling it will not be a bad movie discussion today. But before we can get into that, I have a brand new guest that we need to welcome to the show. So, everybody, welcome Miss Marie Miller to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is a pleasure. Would you like to talk a little bit about yourself and what it is exactly that you do?
So I am an energy healer. I teach people how to change subconscious beliefs. So I work in the world of woo, and I work sort of in a world that's sort of like science fiction. So there's been a lot of sci-fi movies that were like a huge influence on me and the way that I think, because I honestly think on some levels when we get into the sci-fi realm, it's actually just information coming in from somewhere else. And that there may be a place where maybe this is true.
Well, that totally makes sense. And who are any of us to judge anyway?
That's
But
true.
so, with all of that said, we're going to be discussing a classic sci-fi movie today
Mhm.
from one of the most iconic sci-fi franchises of all time. Some may say it's the number one sci-fi franchise. Some may say it's number two, and something else is number one.
Yep.
I'm not going to pick sides. Well, I mean, for those that have been here for the 3 years that we've been doing the show, you know which side I tend to fall on, but I don't necessarily hate on this one either. But making it an evening at the movie debut, finally, 3 years later, we are going to be discussing Star Trek, the motion picture. Interesting movie, to
Mm-hmm.
say the least. But before we can get into the discussion, just a little bit of background information for people who are listening. Um, Star Trek released on December 7th, 1979. Was directed by Robert Weiss. Released by Paramount Pictures. Had a $44 million budget, and in 1979 made 139 at the box office. 139 million at the box office. So that is a lot of money. Well, 139 million is a lot of money in today's standards, but
Mm-hmm.
back then, that's like enough to fuel a third world country. And sorry, I had to wet my whistle. Um, so again, I didn't bring this up in our pre-recording conversation either, but as far as the Rotten Tomato score for Star Trek goes, would
Mm-hmm.
you like to wager a guess as to what you think Rotten Tomatoes gave the movie?
Oh gosh, I have no idea. I didn't even think to look.
Well, I mean, considering how much money the movie made, it had a Rotten Tomato score of 52%. So, not necessarily one of the most critically acclaimed movies in the franchise.
And it's not my favorite of the franchise either. It definitely had some clunkiness to it.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that. But also, if you are a Trekkie, like to enjoy a good science fiction movie, or
Mhm.
52% science fiction movie, according to Rotten Tomatoes, you can find Star Trek. I believe most of the franchise is streaming right now on Paramount Plus.
Mhm.
So, let's see. As far as a brief, very brief overview of the plot, the Federation calls on Admiral James T. Kirk and the crew of the Starship Enterprise to contain an immense Nimbus object that's on a crash course with Earth. After investigating, the crew discovers that the alien cloud harbors artificial intelligence with an ominous primary directive. I think that pretty much sums it up in a nice little package with a nice little bow on top of it.
Mhm.
Um, all right, so discussion. What is it about the movie that you fell in love with?
Well, I think I had already fallen in love with Star Trek before I was introduced to the movie. So instead of it being an introduction, it was more of a continuation of my fandom. So it was good to see the crew back again.
Mhm.
Um, because the things that I love about Star Trek is that idea of exploration and going into the unknown and seeing what else is out there.
Which is basically what the entire premise of the
Mhm.
franchise, even going back to the original 1966 TV
Mhm.
show, was all about.
Yep.
I mean, even the iconic spoken monologue intro from the original TV show, you know, I don't remember it word for word, but, you know, it's all basically about exploration and all of that and seeking out new worlds and boldly
Hmm.
going where no man has gone before.
Yep.
So that is a very well. I'm not even 100% sure what the right word would even be, but it's a very intriguing aspect to the movie.
Yeah.
I think for me, I love seeing because I remember being a little kid
Hmm.
watching the reruns of that original TV show and falling in love with it because, and I don't even know why. I probably the aliens and all the other stuff that they encounter throughout the entire series, and being 3, 4, 5 years old at the time, that stuff's incredibly fascinating.
Hmm.
But and obviously not intending to be disrespectful and take cheap shots at that original show, but at the end of the day, it was very hokey effect
Hmm.
wise, and there definitely is a huge evolution of
Hmm.
how much the special effects and things of that nature have progressed in what the 10 years from the final episode to when this movie was released. Not completely 100% because there's still some hokiness in the movie.
Oh, yeah. I was watching it the other day and being like, they must have been so proud of these special effects, and by today's standards, they're kind of laughable. Like when they were going out to the ship and they were showing them like in the little transport pod, and they were just so proud of how they could show them like that because they spent so much time keeping the camera on it.
Yeah, well, because again, they couldn't really do a whole lot of that back in the 60s. When
Yeah.
I mean, you basically, for lack of a better insulting term, I mean, you could almost see the damn
Yeah, the strings.
the strings holding up the Enterprise as it literally like swung across a background, and it's like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, one of the things I noticed exactly what you were saying though with like
Mm-hmm.
that aspect, but then like the other thing, kind of sort of along the same line that I noticed was like when they went out in like the quote unquote transport like suit thing,
Mm-hmm.
and they're literally like flying through space, moving from point A to point B, and it literally looks like they're sitting in a damn chair.
Yep.
But there's no chair. I mean, they're literally almost sitting at a perfect seated, angle. But you know, it's not stuff that necessarily ruins the movie per se, but
Mm-hmm.
it's just especially being where we're at now with graphics and all of that. I mean, I understand the fact that when this movie came out, I think they started production on this in like 1975, if I remember correctly, and that's probably right about the time that even like Lucas is developing everything that they use for
Mm-hmm.
creating Star Wars as well. So even like the effect type stuff that he used for Episode 4, they didn't necessarily have at their disposal for Star Trek the Motion Picture either.
Yeah.
So, but as you move deeper into the franchise, though, with Wrath of Khan, Search for
Yeah.
Spock, and ultimately into my personal favorite um, Star Trek movie of all time, The Voyage Home.
That is my favorite too. Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad you said that because I am so worried whenever I bring that up that people are gonna be like, "Really? That's your favorite Star Trek?" But it's freaking hilarious,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, at the end of the day, I'm excited for the fact that one day, hopefully, we'll get to that point. I actually love my favorites being 4 being the number one, but Wrath
Mm-hmm.
of Khan into that natural progression into The Voyage Home are probably my 3 favorite in order. Like Wrath of Khan, Spock, and then The Voyage Home.
I
It's
think.
just an interesting storyline arc to progress through with
Mm-hmm.
ultimately the death of Spock, searching for Spock, and then ultimately the redemption and recovery of Spock.
Mm-hmm.
So, but was there anything that really jumped out at you as something about the movie that you absolutely hated, or is this something that you just fell in love with and
With the voyage home. Um,
or
Go
the
ahead.
motion picture?
Oh, the motion picture. I was
Yeah.
really annoyed by the costumes, to be honest. I don't know what they were thinking with the costuming, going from yeah,
The movie to
yeah,
the
going from the series to that, and I think they corrected it with Wrath of Khan moving forward. But I've just never been a big fan of the unitards, and I wasn't sure what that big black thing was in the middle of their bellies. It just looked a little odd coming from like how stylish the original series was
Yeah.
into yeah.
Well, because again, this is one of those movies that I didn't particularly care for
Hmm.
from the first time I saw it, but I remember it not being like my least favorite of the franchise.
Hmm.
But I didn't necessarily, because it's probably been 3 decades since
Hmm.
I've seen this movie. So I was kind of like, okay, this is something I need to rewatch because I've had moments with other movies where
Hmm.
it's like stuff that I may not necessarily have cared for in the past as a grown adult with, you know, cognition changes in my brain.
Hmm.
You know, opinions can change, whether it's food, movies, TV, music, whatever. And they're like, okay, well, if I sit down and fully understand the whole idea of what's going on here, I might be able to wrap my head around it a little bit better. But
Hmm.
then, yeah, like the first time you see like the Starfleet uniforms, it's like, what the? Come on, people. I mean, I know that the times were different back then, but costumes is not something that should be lacking. You shouldn't go from, what you had in the 60s
Hmm.
to pure garbage unitards
Yep.
10 years later. Just my own opinion. But um, I think one of the other things that I wasn't necessarily as huge of a fan of was at times the pacing of the story felt kind of slow.
Hmm.
So that kind of was a put off for me.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's still at the end of the day, it's still not horrible. But if you're not necessarily a huge diehard fan of the franchise, though,
Hmm.
having a slower pace and all of that can definitely be a huge hurdle that you have to get over to be able to
Hmm.
fully appreciate a movie.
Right.
And I mean, I would assume in 1979 when this movie came out, you had people coming into the world, being the franchise, that hadn't necessarily seen
Hmm.
the original series before, so they kind of sort didn't have a grasp as to what was going on. And I kind of feel
Hmm.
no, I mean, I don't think you necessarily have to have a deep rooted understanding of the whole lore to be able to get something from this movie.
Right.
I mean, they do kind of sort of briefly discuss the past in the beginning,
Hmm.
but it's not something that like the whole story is based off of having a deep rooted
Hmm.
knowledge of the 60s TV show.
At the same time, it's not the kind of movie that's going to make someone a fan if they weren't already. I don't think it was a good recruiting tool as far as gaining new fans because I mean it
I'm
was
I'm glad you said that, not me.
yeah.
I'm glad that they followed up the motion picture with Wrath of Khan
Yeah.
because um, I if Wrath of Khan had been what the motion picture was,
Mhm.
in my own personal opinion, I don't think the franchise would have ever evolved into what it has become today.
Hmm.
The franchise may have been doomed from that point.
Yeah.
Whether or not that's accurate or not, not necessarily for me to say, but yeah.
The Rathacon definitely corrected a lot of mistakes and flaws that were in the motion picture. Definitely helped move everything forward.
Well, I think it gave people a little bit more of a relatable storyline as well,
Mm-hmm.
and not necessarily one that was as deeply rooted in, there was a whole lot of sci-fi lingo, and I mean the original motion picture was very deeply rooted in science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of the movies are as well, but um, I also feel like once you get into Wrath of Khan, you get things become a little bit more humanistic, which is a little bit
Mm-hmm.
easier for um, not so diehard fans to follow
Yeah.
because it's more. I feel like it's more relatable.
Well, yeah, because it's about vengeance, it's about anger, it's about very human emotions. Plus, it has those really cool earworms, which were had made a huge impact. That's the biggest thing I remember as a kid seeing it is the fact
Hmm.
that they had those little worms that went into the ears. That freaked me out when I was little.
Yeah, that was seeing that as a kid was probably one of my first traumatic moments in movies.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, so I I feel like it's probably a safe bet. Why don't we just go ahead and further and go deeper into our discussion, because I
Mm-hmm.
feel like we're set up and we've obviously got plenty more time. But like we can get into Wrath of Khan and Search for Spock and possibly even The Voyage Home, just because that happens to be both of our favorite movies in the franchise.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is it about those three movies then, as well, that you fell in love with?
Well, I think they really captured a lot of the spirit of the original series. Um,
Mm,
I mean, because Wrath of Khan, I mean, a big part of it was about the relationship between Kirk and Spock and their friendship and connecting them, and that's the other through line in the search for Spock. Is it's so much about the two of them? Because I'm also a Spurk fan, right? Like, I don't know if you're
hmm
familiar with how there's like a whole bunch of people who like to imagine that Kirk and Spock were more than just friends, and that really just shows a lot more of their relationship and brings them closer between Wrath of Khan and Search for Spock. Because a lot of the things in the original series was about the dynamic between the two of them, like between the
hmm
passion and the logic.
Yeah. Well, and that's also kind of sort of one of the running jokes throughout the franchise is Spock and his, well, that's
Hmm.
illogical.
Yep.
So, I mean, it was even brought up briefly in the motion picture as well.
Yeah.
But I would definitely 100% agree with the fact that there's, I feel like there's something definitely more between the two, because I feel like Kirk would go to the ends of the earth for any of the people, any of the members on his crew, but there's something between him and Spock,
Hmm.
and and yeah, progressing from that ultimate moment at the end of the movie to a whole movie dedicated to his search for Spock
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately sacrificing his good standing with, you know, the um, Starfleet
Mm-hmm.
and losing his command and X, Y, and Z and everything that progressing into again the voyage home and all of that. It definitely it creates a more solid emotional story, in
Mm-hmm.
my opinion. So, um, was there anything about the um, other three movies that you didn't like at all, or
Um, no, I didn't find as many of the flaws with those three. They were just fun.
I'm as far for like me, like the
Mm-hmm.
whole, especially getting to like the voyage home,
Mm-hmm.
where I feel like that movie is probably one of the most quotable movies of the first four.
Mm-hmm.
Even like when they first arrived back in what, 1980, quote
Mm-hmm.
unquote, whatever it is, San Francisco, and you know they leave Golden Gate Park and they're walking into downtown San Francisco and they almost get ran over by the taxi cab and um the guy jumps out of the cab and he's like, "You dumbass!" And Kirk turns around, and looks at him. He's like, "Well, double dumbass on you,"
Mm-hmm.
because evidently they don't have dumbasses in the 23rd century.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that was probably my absolute favorite part of that movie was the uh, nuances with the whole difference in how the world is between 2000 or the 23rd century and the 20th century
Mm-hmm.
because you don't think about it necessarily being that much when um, you currently live in the
Yeah.
21st or 20th century, whatever, you know, the present day. But, you know, obviously, even going back and looking at, you know, classic literature and stuff that we had to grow up reading in
Mm-hmm.
school, the difference between like our literature now and Shakespeare is
Yeah.
apples and oranges.
You also have to understand that Shakespeare actually was really, really dirty. I had a really good college professor who pointed out all the euphemisms because our language has changed so much.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's going to be euphemism throughout language,
Oh,
however the language evolves.
yeah. I don't know. I found it really amusing that they couldn't find Alameda, mostly because I used to do all my grocery shopping in Alameda, so I know exactly where it was.
It doesn't seem like it's. I've never been to the area before,
Hmm.
but Alameda doesn't strike me as being somewhere that is a long way away from Golden Gate Park.
Um, you'd have to change BARTs at least once and take a bus. So, or coming from Golden Gate Park, it'd be a bus, a BART, change the BART, and get on another bus. So it's not too bad.
Oh, well, that's more complicated than I thought it was.
Yeah, it's not quite a straight shot.
But as we were saying though, with
Mhm.
a couple of the other movies though, as we're getting deeper into the franchise,
Mhm.
The voyage home definitely 100% felt like something that you didn't have almost any. Yeah, I guess you kind of sort of do when it comes to that um, probe that they're trying to
Mhm.
save the world from.
Yeah.
But other than that, though, there's a huge portion of the movie that you really don't have to have any kind of science fiction knowledge or base of knowledge to be able to fully appreciate either.
Mhm.
So I think that's one of the things I love most about that movie is it really felt like something that I could just sit back and enjoy and laugh at,
Mhm.
whether it's Spock and his quirk, because even with all the different barriers between the difference in times, you
Mhm.
also had to factor in that movie too that Spock is just now coming back into his own.
Mhm.
So on top of all of that, then you have the whole Spock trying to gain you know his faculties back about himself as well.
Yeah.
Like the whole scene with them riding into town on the bus with the punk rocker that's listening to the music way too loud.
Mhm.
I love that scene.
And they brought that same guy back for, was it for Picard? Yeah.
Yeah, I
Trying to remember where they put him
ashamed ashamed to admit that I still haven't sat down and watched Picard yet.
in.
Only for the pure fact that um, I've heard people say that they fell in love with it early on, but then towards the end, it kind of sort of went and turned on them.
Yeah.
But it is what I mean. It's how Hollywood is nowadays, anyway. It's like that might have worked a little bit better had they done it, you know, 25 years ago when
Mhm.
Patrick Stewart was a little bit younger,
Yep.
and it hadn't been, 2.5 decades since he last put on the, you know, captain's uniform.
Yeah, at some point it's time for new stories and to let the next group of captains take over.
Yeah,
I
which
mean,
I always imagined that some of those shows that came after, like
mhm.
Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and all that, had longer runs on TV than they did.
Mhm.
But realistically, none of them were really on that long.
Yeah.
I think most of them only ran like 6 or 7 seasons, which yeah, that's not a bad run on TV, but there have been shows that have lasted a lot longer though too,
Yeah.
and they all outlasted the original TV show. I mean, God, I don't even want to think about where they would have gone with if that show had gone longer than 3 seasons.
Well, did you ever watch the cartoons?
Yes, when I was a kid.
I kind of liked what they did with that because you could tell that they took all the ideas that they didn't have the technology to do the special effects with on live action and put them all into the cartoons. So that was kind
That
of fun to see, where the writer's imagination was going, but they just couldn't produce live action.
therein lies the benefit of the animation is you can literally take the gloves off and do anything that you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, is there anything that you could think of right off the top of your head as far as the first couple movies go that if you were given the chance to right the wrong
Hmm.
that you would um, fix about the movies?
I think we've already mentioned a couple of them. Like a lot of it would be design choices. With the redesign of the
Okay.
Enterprise, I don't know how much I like those metallic hallways. I know it probably seemed cool at the time. Probably that and the costumes would be the big things that I'd brush up. And of course, maybe changing the pace of that first movie.
Yeah. Well, because when I sat down to rewatch the movie,
Mm-hmm.
I messaged a buddy of mine who is actually a lot bigger Star Trek fan than myself. Um, I referenced the fact that, oh my God, it's been 20 minutes and they still haven't gotten to the Enterprise yet.
Yeah.
And he's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, literally from the time Kirk steps off the transporter, well, it's not literally, but Kirk steps off the transporter, they get on that little mini flying transporter,
Mm-hmm.
and then especially with like the shots from outside of the transport, it literally looks like it's a snail pace, just
Yeah.
putting, and it's like okay, well, and then like a minute later they're still putting through space. It's like okay, you don't have to show everything. You can cut out a lot of this stuff, and had they cut out some of that stuff, maybe you have a movie that lasts an hour and 55 minutes instead of 2 hours and 10 minutes.
Yeah. But you know, you could feel that they were so proud of those special effects because that was a big deal back then.
Yeah. Well, and I don't think it necessarily was as prevalent yet because Star Wars hadn't come out and hadn't
Yeah.
taken off the way it took off. But it kind of sort of speaks to the fact that both, excuse me, movies were deeply rooted in their special effects and
Mm-hmm.
all of that. So, um, yeah, both companies are probably going to be incredibly proud and egotistical to show off what they had at their disposal. Whether one was clearly a ways behind the other,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean, even at the same time, Lucasfilm wasn't all rainbows and sunshine when they did Episode 4 either.
Mm-hmm.
So
And
there was flaws in that too.
but when it comes to science fiction, is it really about the special effects leading, or should it be a story and the special effects like are there to support the story? I would almost argue that as long as the story is good and believable and you're engaged emotionally, that I'm actually okay with kind of hokey special effects as opposed to really brilliant special effects and a bad story.
Yes, because well, and we've talked about
Mm-hmm.
a couple hokey special effects sci-fi movies before
Mm-hmm.
on the show. Um, one of which was last May. We talked about what was Megaforce.
Okay. I don't think I've seen that one. But I love Logan's
It-
Run,
it-
right? That's cheesy, but it's fun.
oh, same. Oh yeah, same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all original Star Wars, Star Trek, Megaforce, Logan's Run. All those, all are releasing about the same time in
Hmm.
cinema history, so they're all going to factor in some way, shape, or form to. Sure. Oh, that was just my co-host who
Hmm.
loves to pop her nose in and hey, because we've got another recording later today, and
Okay.
she's all like, "Are we just recording today, or are we going live?" Oh, oh, we can go live. I don't care. But but no, I mean, obviously, there was some really like B-rated sci-fi movies that came out in the late '70s and early '80s. But yeah, no, I would 100% agree with you though. If you can give me a good story,
Mhm.
then I'm absolutely okay with special effects and whatnot being a little wonky,
Mhm.
for lack of a better term. So, as a whole, um, what are your thoughts on the first four movies?
I mean, I would, in general, I'm just grateful that we got more than just the original series and their stories got to grow because it seemed like it was so short. Like those first three seasons just weren't enough.
Yeah,
And,
um,
of course, yeah.
because I googled it while I was doing my research as well too, and there was only like 79 episodes in the first run of the series,
Mhm.
being the 1960 shows. So I still come back to the whole point that I feel like with there being only like those 79 shows from the beginning,
Mhm.
if the motion picture had fallen even more on its face than it did,
Mhm.
it would have been easy for Paramount just to say, you know what, nope,
Yeah.
see you, bye. So even with that hiccup from being the motion picture,
Mhm.
I ultimately think as a whole, I enjoyed watching the TV
Mhm.
series when I was a kid. Um, yeah, motion picture stumbled a little bit, but then, like we
Well,
were saying though, Wrath of Khan and
mhm.
Spock and Voyage Home picked up the ball and you know ran with it too.
I
So
I will say in favor of the motion picture, it did carry one of the core principles where it wasn't about like shooting the enemy, that there was like a puzzle to be solved or something, a reason to come with, or that that there
yeah,
was like a that there was an answer that really just had to come from understanding the enemy. That once they understood that V'ger was really Voyager and just looking for them, and once they solved the puzzle, we were able to come to a peaceful solution. Because that's the premise of a lot of the shows is trying to find a peaceful solution instead of just beating someone down. So it did have that
yeah,
going for
you do get some, I guess, hand to hand combat
it. Mm-hmm.
throughout time,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean, yeah, it is definitely more of a cerebral.
Mm-hmm.
Herein probably lies one of the biggest differences between the two franchises,
Mm-hmm.
where um, Star Trek definitely has a more cerebral feel to it
Yep.
than um, Star Wars, where can definitely be a lot more aggression based.
Yeah.
Um, Lucas probably definitely yes does not want you to think it's as aggressive as what it was, but I mean, let's
It's.
be honest. You have a group of people who are supposedly peacekeeping knights of the Republic,
Mm-hmm.
and they go around with futuristic light swords and
Mm-hmm.
killing people. It's like,
Yep.
you're keeping the peace by killing people. I mean, a great wise man once said, "Non-violent, non-violent."
Mm-hmm.
But um, still, I mean, it's Star Wars, and Star Wars is probably one of the first two movies that I ever saw in the movie theater as a kid. So, from the moment that first Star Destroyer comes right over the top of the screen into the, from the top of the screen into
Mm-hmm.
the frame, as a, I think, 4-year-old kid seeing that for the first time, I was hooked.
Yeah.
So, but so as a like we say, as a whole, um, if we're just looking at the four movies together,
Mm-hmm.
being Motion Picture, Con, Spock, and The Voyage Home, what would you rate this portion of the story out of 5?
I would do it 4 out of 5.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I I would probably agree. I mean, yeah, I mean the motion picture really. If it wasn't for the motion picture, I could conceivably see myself giving it 5.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the things that we talked about with the motion picture, that's really enough for me to like. Hmm, yeah, no.
Yeah.
I'll take 1 point off for that.
It's also
Um,
one that I'm not gonna rewatch. Like I don't know how many times I've seen The Voyage Home. I'll watch that one over and over. Same with Wrath of Khan. But motion picture, that's one you can watch once and be okay with for a few years.
for 30,
Yep.
because yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, like I said earlier, I'm not faulting Trekkies for it by any stretch of the imagination. If they want to love the movie, you
Yeah.
know, more power to them. But definitely between the last time I watched it and this time watching it, I don't hate it as much as I did back then.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still not something I feel like the most for me. The motion picture is what the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones was for Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
I know they're there.
Yep.
I can I can take my big, you know, goober hand and grab them and take them out of my DVD collection and throw them away
Yep.
and not and go 20, 30 years without having to watch them and just watch the parts of the story that I need to watch for my own personal enjoyment.
Yeah, it's not a good sign when you watch a movie and you're like, oh wait, I have seen this. But like in a way of like, oh yeah, and it was unimpressive the first time. Although my partner did
Yeah.
remind me, apparently they do reference the motion picture in Lower Decks, which I don't know if you've seen. I'm a huge Lower Decks fan.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it is a part of the franchise. It
Hmm.
may be the redheaded stepchild of the franchise, but you know, but even like last week, it was where I had a couple on the show, and we were discussing the movie Galaxy Quest and how much of a satire it is to the Star Trek franchise as a whole.
Yeah.
And it's like, even going back and watching the motion picture again, you start to see little things that happen in that movie that it's like, bam, I got that from. There's a connection between that and Galaxy Quest now. I see
Hmm.
that where it's like, yeah, when it had been, you know, probably 15 years in between those two movies when I was younger, you don't necessarily remember it. But um, if you're a hardcore Star Trek fan, there's absolutely probably nothing wrong with this movie for you. For
Hmm.
me, like I said, it's probably one of those. Just because I'm more of a Star Wars nerd than a Star Trek nerd, but
Hmm.
for me, it's gonna. I'll probably just chalk it up to always being another Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones type thing. So
Yeah. Like if I'm trying to get someone into Star Trek and get them to love them, that's not the movie I'd send them to.
no, but I feel like you probably could start them off with Wrath of Khan and
Probably good.
probably be in a lot better situation than you would be if you started them off with, um, yeah, the motion picture.
Yeah.
So, well, alrighty. I think. Is there anything else that you had that you wanted to bring up before we wrap the show up?
Not really. I mean, there's so much more we could cover some other time about like the other 6 movies or 9
Oh,
movies.
absolutely,
But yeah,
absolutely. And
but,
before I wrapped up because I've got a natural progression of stuff that I have for my own
mhm.
weird ass brain, I have to go down in order. So um, once we get to the well, being the conclusion now, we'll go through the. Obviously, I have to thank the listeners for being here each and every week. You
Mhm.
guys are amazing. Um, as the show is 3 years old and well past our 200th episode at this point, that is a major milestone in my opinion. So I thank everybody for being here for the ride. You guys are
Mhm.
amazing. And without that, I probably wouldn't be doing this. And the fact that I'm still 3 years later doing it when I didn't think I was even going to make it 6 months says a lot.
Mhm.
So thank you to them always and forever. Thank you to Marie for being here. This was a lot of fun. And more than anything, you are welcome to come back anytime you want and we can discuss more in depth the rest of the franchise. We can get more in depth into Khan and Search for Spock and Voyage Home
Mhm.
that we didn't get to do this time as well. But you are more than welcome to come back anytime. This was a lot of fun.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Um, as for what we have coming up, I'm not gonna lie. I'm not. I know we've got movies that everyone should see at least once in their lifetime month coming up. So stay tuned for that. Um, but as always, the easiest way to stay updated as to what's coming up on the show is to follow us on all the social media apps that we have. Just search for An Evening at the Movies and you will find us. Otherwise, you can look for myself as well, and I can steer you in the right direction. So, um, with all of that said, uh, again, thank you, Marie, for being here. And at the end of the day, we hope you guys come back for An Evening at the Movies. We will see you guys next week.
An Evening at the Movies is a proud member of the I Did Not Make These Rankings podcast network. Other shows in the network include Mass Debaters, The Sip List, Crushgasm, Love is Black, Men Are the Prize, Crime Rewind, and Literature Reapers. You can find out all about our shows and more at idnmtrpodcastnetwork.com. Happy listening.